Previously in the complete creation.
As you can see, it is clearly a human footprint. Yes, it's on the larger scale of 14 inches long, but there will be men watching this lecture who have feet that big. Welcome back. Thank you for continuing with me on this journey into history, science, and the Bible. We started off with the current subtopic of the Paluxy fossil human footprints, pointing out how the evolutionists and creationists actually agree on something: the significance of any evidence showing humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. Remember, Louis Jacobs spelled it out for us, that if dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time, it would mean that the Earth is young, the Genesis account of creation is true, and the religion of evolution is falsified. We've been examining the fossil human footprints found in the Paluxy River of Glen Rose, Texas, which are found in rock layers world famous for their dinosaur tracks. Before I continue, I would like to call your attention to the trail of footprints from Laetoli, Africa. They don't look like much, do they? Yet everyone agrees these are completely human footprints. In fact, the discoverers of the famous Lucy fossil adamantly contend that these footprints demonstrate that Lucy walked upright, just like a human, and had that non-diverging big toe, just like a human. We will revisit this claim in a later lecture, but what I want to focus on right now is that these are acknowledged to be fossil human footprints. Compare them to some of the Paluxy fossil human footprints. So to acknowledge on one hand that these footprints are human, yet argue that these footprints are vague impressions, is sanctimonious at best. Immediately on the other side of the Paluxy River, across from the Taylor Trail, which we examined in the last lecture, is the Riles Trail, a series of human footprints in a left-right-left pattern. The trail was named after Jim Riles, who cut one of the left footprints out of the rock ledge in the 1930s, and that hole is still visible today. So you can use that hole as a landmark for navigating the trails if you wish to go investigate the tracks for yourself. Just remember, it is now illegal to remove fossil footprints from the Paluxy riverbed. The right footprint immediately preceding the removed track contains some fairly nice details, which are unusual, and we will call that particular track the Riles track. And as you can see here, the footprint did have decent toe impressions, and a human foot fits beautifully. The most prominent toe is that all-important big toe, which is what identifies it as a human footprint. Remember, even apes have a different footprint than humans, and you can tell an ape footprint because that big toe is diverging from the foot. These are footprints from a clearly bipedal creature with a non-diverging big toe. That's a human footprint. But what's also unusual about this particular track is that evidently when the person was stepping forward, when they lifted and pulled their foot forward, the toes scraped across the surface of the mud, leaving grooves. You can count the impressions of multiple toes being dragged across the mud for a fleeting moment. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now remember this particular track. We're going to come back to it. You'll remember the story I shared of the discovery of the -3B human footprint in the Taylor Trail. It was labeled -3B because the dinosaur track was uncovered first and, of course, labeled the -3. Later on, the human footprint was discovered, so the human footprint was given the B designation. 3 footsteps ahead of this one in the trail was the Taylor Trail +1 human footprint. It was an okay human footprint impression when it was first uncovered. Here it is being pointed to by Stan Taylor shortly after excavation. It has a definite human foot outline and is way up in the middle toe area of the dinosaur track into which it stepped. However, there's a very interesting story behind this particular footprint. If you head over to Dr. Don Patton's website, he has this photo and also a photo of a footprint cast made by Stan Taylor, which Dr. Patton states on his webpage is a cast of the Taylor Trail +1 human footprint. This is actually a mistake, and I'm glad this is still on his website. Now, Don is a friend of mine, so please don't misinterpret my pointing out his mistake, caused by the mistake of another friend of mine, Dr. John Morris. This is the very cast that Don shows on his website. In fact, this is the very cast Stan Taylor made and showed in his 1973 film, Footprints in Stone. It's the pristine footprint of a human child. The ball, the arch, the heel, all 5 toes. It is a perfect footprint, though the details are shallow. Now, when I'm giving lectures, I routinely get a child to volunteer to play Cinderella and see if the foot fits. Obviously, it does, and remarkably so. They did exactly that in the Footprints in Stone film, and they showed exactly where the fossil footprint was found, from which they made the mold and cast. It was on the park ledge in Dinosaur Valley State Park, right here. This is about 2 kilometers downstream from the Taylor Trail and is definitely not a cast of the Taylor Trail +1 human footprint. The size of the foot is all wrong, and it doesn't match the photos that Stan Taylor took of the +1 track when he excavated it in 1969. This cast was originally in the possession of my friend Dr. John Morris for many years before he gave it to Don Patton, who then gave it to me probably close to 15 years ago. On the back of the cast, you can see a note written and signed by John D. Morris in 1989, stating, Taylor Trail +1 as first found around 8 inches. Downstream erosion has removed deep heel and lengthened the print to 11 to 13 inches, probably more accurate now than before. Also a second notation written on the bottom, Taylor Trail +1, which sure looks like John Morris's handwriting. And then what is presumably an original inscription, which has gotten beat up enough over the decades that it's not really readable. It looks like FT-19, or possibly that's a 69 for the year 1969 when Stan Taylor was very active in the Paluxy and most likely made this cast. Regardless, this is not a cast of any footprint on the Taylor Trail ledge. It is a cast of one of the many human child tracks on the park ledge. I do not know from where John got the erroneous information he wrote down. Presumably it was what was told to him by whomever gave him the cast. I don't know. I didn't ask John, and I doubt he would remember the details. I mean, that's the whole point of writing notes, right? But the history of this mistake is important for a rather unusual reason. That simple, innocent error on the part of multiple creationists triggered some militant anti-creationist zealots into a blind rage. On August 12th, 1989, Dr. John Patton spoke at a creation conference in Dayton, Tennessee. As part of his lecture, he presented the Riles track, the Parkledge child's print, which he mistakenly said was the +1 human footprint in the Taylor Trail, and the -3B, all of which provided profound and compelling proof that human footprints were found among the dinosaur tracks. In the audience were two well-known militant anti-creationists who had spent a lot of time in the Paluxy researching the fossil footprints. They were visibly disturbed during the presentation, and the next day they flew down to Glenrose, where multiple eyewitnesses saw the two men in the riverbed at the Taylor Trail site with an iron bar. Their behavior was so suspicious and out of the ordinary that multiple witnesses, including people just visiting the McFall site, reported the suspicious behavior. The three tracks Dr. Patton had featured in his lecture the night before had been destroyed, pulverized by the hammering of something pointy. The Taylor Trail +1 human track really wasn't that spectacular a track, so why was it pulverized? It would seem it was because it was one of the three tracks featured in the night before in Dr. Patton's lecture, where he mistakenly presented the truly spectacular Parkledge child's track as the Taylor Trail +1 track. But the Riles track and the -3B Taylor Trail human track were also destroyed. It would appear these anti-creationists destroyed all three tracks that Dr. Patton had specifically focused on in his lecture. They knew where the tracks were and specifically which tracks Dr. Patton was referencing. This is why there are now only casts of the Taylor Trail human footprint -3B, because the original was destroyed. There are only 3 copies of this cast in the world. I have 2 of them. This original plaster cast and a more durable fiberglass cast I obtained permission to reproduce for my traveling creation exhibition. The third cast is on display at Creation Evidence Museum in Glenrose, where you can go see it firsthand for yourself. Now, lest you may be left to think the destruction of these tracks was a random act of vandalism, let's look closer at the situation. Not many people would be able to locate the Taylor Trail. Even fewer still would be able to locate and identify specific tracks within that trail, like the +1 and the -3B. Even fewer still could tell you which track is the Riles track, which is in a separate trail of human footprints on a rock ledge on the other side of the river from the Taylor Trail. The vandals knew where the Taylor Trail was. They knew how to navigate the trail and targeted the 3 specific tracks showed by Dr. Patton only the night before. The vandals obviously had extensive knowledge of the location because they were able to navigate and target the tracks which were underwater at that time. No, this was no random act. This was a very targeted act by knowledgeable individuals who were apparently responding to Dr. Patton's lecture, which included mistakenly targeting the +1 Taylor Trail track. Tell me, would you consider it scientific to destroy fossil evidence? Or would you interpret such actions as religious zeal to defend an evolutionary worldview by destroying the scientific evidence that destroys that evolutionary worldview? Clearly, the anti-creationists agreed with us creationists that the evidence was profound and incontrovertible. Their actions speak far louder than words, and the anti-creationists were triggered by the evidence to such an extreme that they decided the evidence must be destroyed and hidden from the world, and took it upon themselves to do just that. So, I now go around and show the world the evidence they don't want you to see. I agree with the anti-creationists. The evidence is profound and incontrovertible. Just upstream from the Taylor Trail is what is probably a continuation of the human Taylor Trail. It's 15 human footprints in a right-left-right pattern. Some of the human footprints step onto dinosaur tracks while others are isolated. Called the McFall Trail, or sometimes the Upper Taylor Platform, it contains some really spectacular human tracks. And these photos are all the kind courtesies of Dr. Don Patton and are on his website, as he has graciously given away all his hard work for free, so that you can see the evidence yourself from the comfort of your living room. The number 12 human track stepped upon a freshly made dinosaur track, and partly obliterating the heel of the dinosaur track, but the foot stepped into the mud, slid back before being lifted in the progress of forward locomotion. It's very interesting because you can see the toe drags in the mud from when the foot slid back. The number 4 also obliterated the heel of the heel portion of a dinosaur track. But before someone jumps up and down and gets all excited saying the human footprint is just a dinosaur's heel impression, notice that there's other dinosaur tracks on the ledge that have no such impression. It is only the dinosaur tracks that were stepped on by the human in their right-left-right stride. The +4 is a spectacular human footprint with beautiful preservation of the ball, the arch, the heel, and the toe outlines. What you can't see in this photo, because it's taken directly overhead, is an unusual 3D effect that has taken place. You see, there is still that remaining claim by the skeptics that the human tracks are vague and are simply smudged dinosaur tracks. But a very unusual erosional effect has taken place in the Paluxy River. You remember I mentioned that many of the dinosaur tracks have been infilled, evidently with limey mud that had been contaminated with iron. The infilling mud produced a harder limestone than the layer of limestone hosting the tracks. Now, you are all smart and educated individuals now. After watching this series, you know what differential erosion is. The limestone layer is softer than the track infill, so the limestone gets eroded away over time, leaving behind the fossil dinosaur tracks, which now become raised above the limestone surface, like you can see here in this dramatic example, where the harder dinosaur track infill has now become raised several centimeters above the limestone. You'll see this differential erosion effect all over the place in the river. The dinosaur tracks have become raised over time. However, here's another one of the McFall human footprints in stride with the rest, which stepped upon the heel of another dinosaur track. Notice the dinosaur track has become raised through differential erosion over time, while the human footprint has been eroded deeper from differential erosion. Differential erosion is eroding the two fossil footprints in opposite ways. Clearly, the human tracks are not just a part of the dinosaur tracks. Nuh-uh. No way. This demonstrates it conclusively. The human footprints are their own entity. A dinosaur walked in the mud. Its footprints were infilled with watery, limey mud that was contaminated with other minerals that mixed in with the limey mud, which ultimately made a harder, tougher limestone. Shortly after the dinosaur walked in the mud, Before the mud had time to set up, just like concrete, and turn to stone, a human walked in the mud, and some of his footsteps happened to step on some of the dinosaur tracks. I took this photo some 10 years after the trail was first exposed to differential erosion. The trail was excavated in 1999. Now, why did they excavate there? Because Emmett McFall and the Wilson brothers had cut 2 perfect human footprints out of a rock ledge in the 1940s, and there were some faint footprint impressions remaining from that trail, but the trail went under a ledge of solid limestone. So, Dr. Patton, Dr. Baugh, and team followed that trail and spent 2 weeks, sun up to sundown, in the Texas heat, to break up and remove that solid limestone ledge sitting undisturbed on top of the track-bearing layer. They uncovered multiple trails of tracks which hadn't been exposed since the formation of the limestone and clay layers thousands of years ago. I can say thousands of years ago because you heard what Louis Jacobs said. If dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time, then that means the Earth is only a few thousand years old, not billions. Upstream at the McFall excavation site, as part of his excavations for his dissertation, Dr. Baugh removed more limestone overburden to expose the Sir George Trail. Now, this trail of 7 human footprints were found on the main track-bearing layer, but not overlapping any dinosaur tracks. The very first footprint, named the Miller Track in honor of Hugh Miller, shows very nice preservation of all the toes and foot features. And like so many other fossil human footprints here, you can put your foot in the track and it's a really good fit. This is a cast of that footprint. Obviously made in very sloppy mud, it was still a very nicely preserved human footprint. Again, with that all-important big toe, positively identifying it as a human track. Heading downstream, back to the park ledge from where we got that child's footprint cast, that park ledge is littered with fossil human footprints. Some of them have even retained decent details even after 60 years of exposure to erosion in the elements and people walking all over them. In the footprints in stone film, they showed multiple footprints that were indisputably human. They were far better examples of human footprints than the Laetoli tracks were. Now, while many of the tracks are now missing that crucial right-left-right trail of footprints, some of the tracks can still be seen to this day, such as these impressions. The left one is a pretty decent human track, as it even has toe impressions visible. The cluster on the right is possibly multiple human footprints stepping on top of each other, but there has also been possible bear tracks preserved there in the limestone layer. And it's possible that this track up here might be a bear track. And to further complicate matters, bear tracks can often take on the appearance of a human footprint. Bears existing alongside the dinosaurs is just as damning to the evolution myth as human tracks anyway. But you can begin to appreciate the importance of a trail of footprints. Now, I personally have no doubt there's at least one human footprint in that mix, but because the trail is gone, one can only say so much. The slab is broken off in front of these tracks. But if you are looking at these depressions, just to the right of them and a little behind is a hole in the rock. That hole is where this track was removed by Glen Rose resident O.W. Willett in the 1950s. He was fishing at the Blue Hole just upstream from here one day. The fish weren't biting and he got bored. So he wandered downstream, and upon seeing this fossil footprint, decided he was going to cut out that slab of rock containing the fossil footprint and take it home. This missing track caused confusion over the next few decades for multiple researchers because there's actually a trail of footprints involved here. But no one knew that one of the tracks in the trail was missing. It had been removed decades prior. Alas, I am out of time for this segment. Please join me again in the next lecture as we examine this fascinating trail and that Willett track in detail, and look at a novel, non-destructive method of both testing and examining loose slab fossil footprints.
Coming up in the next Complete Creation.
You remember those strange dinosaur tracks that appear to be from some web-footed dinosaur we saw in the Taylor Trail? I also showed you this example from the Park Ledge, but I didn't tell you where it was previously because you would not have known. But here it is, right beside the hole left behind from where the Willett track was removed. So next time you're at Creation Evidence Museum and you are looking at the Willett track with your own two eyeballs, look closely. There is a secondary track identical to those strange web-footed dinosaur tracks going sideways in the slab. The dinosaur evidently walked first, and then the human happened to step right on top of the dinosaur track. It would appear this is why the ball portion of the foot is so deep. The mud was already compressed by a track prior to the human stepping there. So the ball of the human's foot landed in the depression of the dinosaur track.
You can catch the entire series in a variety of ways. You can watch the show online at www.completecreation.org or www.genesisweek.com. You can also purchase the Complete Creation series in full high definition on Blu-ray or video on demand at completecreation.org. Or support the Miracle Channel with a monthly tax-deductible donation and access the entire Complete Creation series in high definition through Corco, Miracle Channel's video on demand service. We need your support to keep this program on the air. So please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K2P4. Or you can make a donation via PayPal online at ianjuby.org/donations. And thank you for your support.